In 2005, Sidney Crosby and Alexander Ovechkin entered their rookie years in the National Hockey League and kicked off what would become a 20-year rivalry, perhaps the most storied in league history. In an NHL.com article about the history of the rivalry, Ovechkin's teammate Tom Wilson said, "They're both extremely competitive. They're both extremely hungry to be the best. Their passion for the game is really second to none. So when you have two guys like that up against each other for their entire careers, it's going to create an amazing rivalry and it's going to create a ton of respect between the two of them." Looking at the search results, we can see that this rivalry is often described as heated. And yes, I'm just going to jump to the conclusion right now. Not unlike Game Changer is adapted fic, Heated Rivalry is also almost certainly adapted fic, although this time, instead of Stucky MCU fan fiction, it is in fact RPF or real person fic. I don't know that Rachel Reid has come right out and said that Shane and Ilya are adaptations of Sydney and Alex, but the comparison is all too clear. The pretty boy Canadian versus the giant masculine Russian. The rivalry that existed not only between the two players, but in no small part because of the machinations of the league and the fans and the press. And from that, Reid spins a tale, a what if scenario. What if those two guys were secretly lovers? Will this second fic adaptation fare any better than Game Changer? Well, I'm not so sure. I think that this heated rivalry is a lot more about the heat than the rivalry. But before we get into all that, let's do our due diligence on this book. We'll thoroughly recap it for people who haven't read it in a while or don't plan to read it but still want to enjoy the analysis and discussion. Then we'll break down and discuss the book, take a look at its themes and characters, and maybe come to a conclusion on whether we think this fic adaptation was better than Game Changer. As Tom Wilson said about the rivalry between Sid and Ovi, it's just pretty cool for the entire hockey world to be taken on that ride the last 20 years. And who's going to be taken for a ride? Do we think it's going to be the big giant Russian or the cute, adorable Canadian boy? It's who you expect. Right from the get-go, I will say Heated Rivalry has an interesting and unusual structure. It has a prologue, an epilogue, and 4 parts of very unequal length. I like to do quick introductions to the characters before we get into the story, and you really only need to introduce the 2 main characters, Shane Hollander and Ilya Rozanov. I got the name right that time. At the beginning of the timeline of the book in 2009, Shane is a rookie for the Montreal Voyageurs. He is biracial. His mother, Yuma, is Japanese. His father is white. He has jet black hair, dark eyes, and freckles, and he's known to blush quite a lot. This is important for his character, and we are actually going to get into a lot of discussion about it, so don't forget that I might not say it all the time in the book, but he's constantly blushing. He is significantly shorter than Ilya Rozanov. He is an only child, a man of routine. He has a very strong relationship with his parents. He's just like a good boy. Ilya Rozanov is like the polar opposite of this guy. He's got kind of light blonde gingery hair. He's Russian. He's hairy. He's masculine. He's a smoker through a good part of the book, whereas Shane would never dream of doing something like that. And he smirks a lot. So the physical characteristic about Shane that you need to remember is that he's constantly blushing. The thing you need to know about Ilya is that he's constantly smirking. I promise this is really important. We're gonna get into this at length later. Ilya is a bad boy, like a classic bad boy. He is like sleeps with people all the time. He's very aggressive on the ice. He's also kind of like a Debbie Downer. He keeps a lot of this to himself. He's not particularly good at English, particularly at the beginning of the book, so he struggles communicating a lot of stuff. That's one of the many things he hates about himself in his life. He doesn't like his accent. He doesn't like that he struggles to communicate. He has huge issues with his family and his parents, and he is a starting star rookie for the Boston Bears. The Boston Bears and the Montreal Voyageurs, but these are not real NHL teams, by the way. These are, in some ways, as important characters as the 2 main characters themselves, because they personify a 100-year-old rivalry between these 2 teams. And we will see right from the beginning of the book that the league and the fans and the press are going to turn these 2 guys into avatars of the rivalry of the 2 teams that they play for. There are a few side characters who are of some importance, I already mentioned Shane's family, Yuna and David Hollander. They're huge hockey parents, very supportive of Shane. Ilya also has a family. He has a deceased mother, a very old, like 80-year-old father named Grigory, and a kind of a deadbeat brother named Andre. There are a few hockey players of some note as side characters. Really, the most important ones are Hayden Pike, a friend of Shane's who becomes more relevant in the later parts of the book. Ryan Price, who is one of the main characters of the next book, Tough Guy, makes kind of a brief cameo appearance with Ilya, and then Scott Hunter, who was the main character of the previous book, looms large over this book. Now, let's get started with the prologue. Every chapter has a date and a location. This is not something that we were treated to in Game Changer. The book starts in October 2016 in Montreal. It's Montreal versus Boston, and we get immediately the rivalry that we are craving to see between these two guys. It's the heated rivalry between Shane and Ilya. They're against each other on the ice. They hate each other, and you can tell right from the prologue like just how important this rivalry is to Montreal and the Montreal fans, and presumably to Boston and the Boston fans, to the press, to everyone who likes hockey. Like, this is something to tune in for, these two teams playing against each other, and specifically these two guys playing against each other. And after Shane and Montreal lose to Boston, Shane goes to an undisclosed location, a condo that he owns that is not his primary living situation, and he hooks up with Ilya Rozanov. He very notably thinks that this is the only safe place where they can do this. And despite the fact that they are getting off with one another, and they apparently have been carrying on like this for nearly 7 years, Shane still feels disgusted and humiliated with himself that he does this. And despite what is happening between the two of them, he hates and feels annoyed with Rozanov. The interaction is fairly brusque between the two of them, but it also has like green shoots of feelings which are going to blossom much later in the book. We get the characterization of these two guys right from this first scene. Shane is very buttoned up, good boy, who likes to be put into a more submissive position. Ilya is a bad boy who likes to put people into submissive positions. And Shane, while he has apparently experimented with some other guys by implication, thinks as this prologue is closing that no one is the same as Ilya, and that as long as this was being offered, Shane would never be able to say no. After that, we flash back to December 2008. This is part 1, and it covers roughly 2.5 years. The World Junior Championships and Shane and Ilya's rookie season with their two teams. Shane and Ilya are 18, 19 years old at the very beginning of the book, and they are two of the most hotly anticipated hockey players on the planet. And they meet for the first time at the World Junior Hockey Championships, where they are both playing. And right from the get-go, Shane is essentially the main POV character for these early chapters, although just like Game Changer, and I think the rest of the Game Changers series, they are all third-person limited narrator POVs. So while we are getting a focus on Shane, there is a narrator who is telling us what's going on. Shane is attracted in like a non-sexual way to Ilya. He's like attracted to his vibe, to his thing, but he can't really put a name to it. He shrugs it off. He's not really sure what's going on there. Shane and Canada, the World Junior Championships are like national teams playing against each other. Shane and Canada lose to Ilya and Russia, and this is very upsetting. And this begins the rivalry between these two guys. We don't see them play and lose, incidentally. And this is something that I will return to later, but I'm just going to put a pin in it now. There's not a lot of hockey in this hockey romance. There's a lot of like talk about hockey, but we don't see a lot of hockey. And it is also told in vignettes. The parts are kind of larger structural pieces. This is like this, very early part of their relationship and getting to know each other in part 1. But even within the parts, each chapter is like one little vignette, and then we will zoom ahead months and sometimes years. So while Chapter 1 took place in December 2008. Chapter 2 takes place in June 2009. Many months have passed. This is the NHL draft. The two guys are vying for first draft pick. Ilya gets it, but Shane gets drafted second. They are essentially tied, and through the entire book, they will essentially be tied in their rivalry with each other. This chapter features, I think, a fun little element of their rivalry. I wish we got to see more of this in the book. Shane can't really sleep, and he goes down late at night to a hotel gym and gets on a treadmill, and Ilya also goes down there, and they, kind of like keep dialing up the speed on the treadmill until they're both going all out. And Shane can't quite keep up with Ilya, which he finds just like absolutely impossible because Ilya is a smoker. But this is also where Shane is starting to notice Ilya more than what he did in the first chapter. He is noticing him in a sexual way, and he's also noticing and comparing Ilya to himself. This is where we really start to get drawn out that Ilya is masculine. Shane thinks that, they're both 18, but Ilya looks like a man and Shane feels like a boy. Shane doesn't really have hair on his body. Shane is smaller. He has like a little cute boy face with freckles on it. And Ilya is much bigger and more muscular and masculine and hairy and looks like a man. And these are not the thoughts that a straight man should be having, but don't worry, this is not going to become a psychodrama for Shane for the next 8 years. This kicks off the beginning of their essentially 10-year rivalry in the book. Shane and Ilya will play for Montreal and Boston throughout the entirety of the book until the very end. And they are both still obsessing with each other as the chapters fly by. And within the first few dozen pages, they begin their sexual relationship. It has been several years for them, but only a few chapters for us when they do some sponsored content advertising recording. And then when they're in the showers, they notice each other and Ilya goes for it. And Shane is freaking out. Obviously, this has been well established in the books that this takes place basically in our reality, where they're at this point, many, many years before the Scott Hunter of it all, there are no out gay NHL players. Doing something like this would be crazy for them to do if they got caught, and their rivalry is already very cemented, and that is a huge aspect of the forbidden romance here. Not only that they are into men, but that they are the avatars of this most important rivalry in sport. But this also begins how they handle it. So we are going to get many, many chapters of them hooking up in hotel rooms. So Shane gives Ilya his hotel room number, and Ilya says, if I knock on door of room 1410 tonight, maybe around 9? ? And Shane says, I might open the door. And Ilya says, I might knock. And he knocks. In the midst of this knocking, Ilya confides that he is sexually voracious and has been with many different types of people, including a Russian boy. In fact, the son of his coach back in Russia. This goes underexplored, I feel like, in the book because of how important Ilya staying in the closet is because he's Russian. But anyway, we find this out in the early side of their sexual relationship, which, remember, is just going to fly by like calendar pages being pulled off in a montage of a movie. In the remainder of part 1, we will find out about Ilya's up family, how they just want money from him. He has a very old father, and his family is not supportive whatsoever. This is contrasted with Una Hollander, mostly Una. David is he's around, but Una is extremely supportive of Shane. She has an encyclopedic knowledge of hockey, and it is very nice to see how supportive they are of him as a hockey player, which is probably a good indication that they will be supportive of him as a gay hockey player. We get many different sex scenes between Shane and Ilya in part 1, including Shane's first time bottoming. I will talk about that later in a section about queer men and queer sexuality, but he loves it, and he's going to be an exclusive bottom after Ilya, knocks on his door. This does start to kick off some exploration for Shane about who he is exactly. There is not a lot of interiority or thinking on his part about being gay. In part 1, he has a 3 choices thought. I can stick to women, find a discreet guy friend with benefits who is not Ilya, or keep hooking up with Ilya. He will choose door number 3. He likes that door being knocked on. Later in the book, he will have more intentional experimentation with a woman where he like very firmly decides like, I'm gay. At this point in the book, it like it's certainly from the outside looking in, it looks like, ooh, you seem to be like a gay gentleman, but he's not quite there yet. It all ends with the end of their rookie season at the NHL awards. They both scored exactly the same number of goals in their rookie year, although Shane won rookie of the year. So we can see like they're just vying throughout the whole of this first part. We don't see it, but like we see a lot of the like stuff around it. We definitely see a lot of like the press and the narrative of their rivalry, and that exists very much right through the end of part 1, where Shane and Ilya are at the awards, and Ilya has retreated to a rooftop bar to smoke a cigarette. Shane finds him there, and this is the first time they kiss and it's in public, kind of, although no one is up there. We feel the danger, the mounting tension of their relationship with each other. This gets us into a quite short part 2, which is essentially about the Olympics and the 2014 Stanley Cup. So quite a lot of time has passed. We go to the Sochi Olympics, so we're in Russia, and this is a very bad time for Ilya because he doesn't like being in Russia. It's during this time that Ilya makes friends with Ryan Price, and then we will go follow Ryan off to Toronto in book 3. We also learn that like now in December of 2013, so many years into Shane and Ilya's sexual relationship, I don't remember exactly when Shane thinks this, but at some point he reflects that they have slept with each other dozens of times. So they have continued to hook up regularly off screen. At this point, there is like this unspoken boundary between them, and we will just keep seeing boundaries getting crossed. The boundary that they have is that it is purely physical. They don't talk about anything, and they definitely don't communicate with one another in any way other than just sharing hotel room numbers, or with Shane when they are in Montreal, the location of his secret condo. It is in part 2 where we see how Shane bought it as like an investment property, but really it's just a place for him to have like, dirty, shameful sex with Ilya Rozanov. The boundary that Ilya crosses in this case is the communications boundary. So instead of just exchanging location information, he does like some light sexting banter, and Shane doesn't like this at all. Or he does, but he doesn't want to like it. And this comes up many, many times for Shane. Shane is a character, a creature driven by shame. So he is turned on by the sexting. He just doesn't want to be turned on by the sexting. Because it is a man, because it is Ilya, because it's like good boys aren't supposed to get turned on by, dirty talk. This reminds me of something that will come up much later in the book. Their entire sexual history up until sometime deep in part 3, Ilya always fucks Shane doggy style, which is a terrible first way to have sex, incidentally. But much later in the book, they actually look at each other while they're having sex, and that is a big moment. Shane thinks while that is happening that he has always liked having sex that way with Ilya because he can pretend that Ilya is someone else, but then he thinks about it one step further and he realizes it's not that he's pretending that Ilya is someone else, he's pretending that Ilya is someone else. So for Shane, a lot of this is about perceptions and how he is perceived, and really about how he perceives himself. So Sochi sucks. Russia, the Russian team is all of these like hotshot Russian players who don't know how to come together. They like immediately flame out. So Ilya's having a bad time. He also has to hang out with his dad, who we learn has dementia because he's quite old. His family is like extremely not supportive. It's just like a bad scene. He doesn't want to talk with Shane at all. And this like hurts Shane a little bit because it's like they have started after, at this point, I believe they are now 4 years or 5 years into their hookup relationship. They're just now getting to the point of like, maybe we could be like people who talk with one another. And Shane wants to go there a little bit, and Ilya is having none of it because he's just super, super unhappy and depressed being in Russia. After returning to North America, they play out the season. Boston wins the Stanley Cup. Ilya is very pleased about this, but he's also just kind of being himself and pretty cavalier about his relationship with Shane. At the NHL awards, the league has conspired to, in their way, to continue to highlight the rivalry between the two of them by having them co-present the most sportsmanlike award. And Ilya shows up like 1 minute before they have to go on, which I find is like deeply unlikable behavior. And after sort of like a crowning achievement, after a very low achievement, Ilya brings Shane to his apartment. Ilya is fine with Shane coming to his apartment, but not vice versa. Ilya makes Shane masturbate for him, which it seems to be a Rachel Reid thing. This also happened in Game Changer, and it was quite hot, I will admit. But afterwards, Ilya doesn't exactly dismiss Shane, but Shane just leaves. They don't say anything, and it is at this point, at the end of the second part, that Shane is now regretting that he didn't kiss Ilya. Part 3 is the longest part. It is the 2016-2017 season, and spoilers from Game Changer if you haven't read that or if you haven't seen my video about it, but the most consequential thing that happens in this book and the most consequential thing that happens in the Game Changers universe is the end of that book when Scott Hunter publicly comes out as a gay NHL, a very famous, like one of the most famous NHL players. Ilya and Shane hate Scott because they're all like very competitive with one another. The end of part 3 lines up with the end of Game Changer. So the very last moment, essentially, of part 3 of Heated Rivalry is Scott Hunter and the New York Admirals winning the Stanley Cup, and Scott bringing Kip onto the ice and kissing him and coming out publicly in that, and then doing his coming out speech at the NHL Awards a little bit after that, and that really changes the game for hockey, and it changes the game. That's why the book is called that. Wink, wink, wink. Changes the game for the characters in Heated Rivalry, but we're not there yet. We are now in 2016, so many, many more years have passed. And also, if you remember, 2016 is when the prologue took place, so we are back to where the prologue was. So we have spent a lot of pages, 11 chapters, just going through the sexual history of these two men. And I would say parts 1 and part 2 are essentially, I don't know if I wouldn't say they're just erotica, but they're kind of erotic romance. And then part 3 and part 4 is going to be more just like romance, because they start talking with each other. It's right at the beginning of part 3 where Ilya is called the F slur for gay men. And I didn't like it in the first book, and I don't like it in this book. And I don't know how long I'm going to go on about it in the discussion about queer men and gayness, but didn't love it. Wish it wasn't in this book. It's also at this point in part 3 where the story opens up a bit in terms of other characters. I would describe parts 1 and part 2 as the positive spin on it would be intimate. It's very close between these two characters. The negative spin might be claustrophobic because there are very few other characters and the guys barely interact with anyone else. It's mostly just the sex scenes with one another and then things that kind of orbit around those scenes. Part 3 opens up and we start seeing Hayden and we start seeing just like other characters interacting with these guys. But there is a pivotal moment at the beginning of part 3 where they are starting to talk with one another. This ice has like started to thaw. Shane thinks that there isn't a single reason why they need to talk to one another anyway. He is like doing the rationalization thing about not having kissed Ilya back in part 2 and just like the frostiness between the two of them. And this is also where he says he pretends to pretend that Ilya is someone else when Ilya is always fucking him doggy style. But it is in this moment where they have like a very tender, intimate scene. It's maybe like the best or one of the best in the book because it like slows down, the pacing slows down, it's more gentle, and Ilya calls Shane sweetheart, which I thought was like kind of weird. That's like a big deal. That is a huge deal in the course of their relationship. Shane is also like really confronting his sexuality at this point. He's having a lot of gay thoughts. Not gay like gay sex thoughts. I mean, he only thinks those about Ilya, but like thoughts about his own queerness. He starts kind of like going through his entire sexual history, and he thinks like he's never been in what he would consider a successful relationship with a woman, and he realizes that he doesn't like to be the one who's doing the fucking so much. He likes to be the one who's being fucked. And he does have the thought like, well, I suppose a woman could like, peg me, but he's too embarrassed to ask that because, as I have said several times by now, Shane is very driven by shame. The word is one letter away from his name. So anyway, after the sweetheart of it all, Shane just literally runs away. He is terrified by this. This is like wild. And then he starts a relationship with a movie star lady. Rose Landry is a woman that he decides to, it's a kind of like his Hail Mary, this is the wrong sports metaphor here, but he is going to try things out with this woman, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So Shane is like a very famous person, but Rose is much more famous than Shane. He likes that he can, be kind of not anonymous, but he can be a little bit more himself around her. She is to him like a genuinely like very cool, interesting, nice person. I think her personality is like a little wooden and a little flat for this book. She is no Elena Rigg, I will put it that way. And they enter into a romantic and sexual relationship, which doesn't go great. Oh, and I neglected to mention this in the sweetheart scene. That's like a very, very important sex scene between the two guys. Not only does Ilya call Shane sweetheart, but he calls him by his first name. This is one of those books where they call, the guys call each other by their last names through the beginning of the, all the tense part of the buildup of their relationship. And once they get close enough, they start referring to each other by their first names. That also happens in the sweetheart chapter. It is also the Shane chapter when Shane runs away and he runs into the arms of this woman, Rose. Doesn't work great. He thinks that having sex with her, which he does do, is like completing a task. Yeah, he's totally gay. I don't know how he's like still orbiting around the idea that he might possibly have a straight bone in his body. And Ilya knows about their relationship because it's pretty public and he's like pretty furious about it. And Rose also realizes this and she just kind of outs Shane to him. She, at a dinner, she suggests like, hey buddy, have you ever thought that maybe you're like less into me and more into my gay male co-star? And Shane is like, oh no, I'm not into him, but I'm not into you either. And then she suggests that they just both be friends, which is nice. And then she sort of like recedes into the background because there are precious few actual side characters in this book. Toward the end of part 3, we get a lot, like the beginnings of some like really good stuff with these two guys. So they play together on an all-star team for the first time. The league had conspired for a part 1 all-stars game for them to be rivals again. Normally, because they're in the same conference, they would be on the same team, but they split it by like the continent of origin of the players. But now, later in the book, many years later, they play together on an all-stars team, and Ilya thinks that it's just like very nice that they sort of know so much about each other from playing against each other and following each other and having a relationship with one another, that they kind of like, they snap together like magnets on the ice. There is a wonderful scene between the two guys, not playing hockey because there's not a lot of hockey in this book, but between the two guys and their respective teammates around a pool where they're playing with like other teammates and their kids, and it's just like a really nice moment between them. We are now starting in the last third of the book, we're starting to get like character moments between these two guys and like tender moments between them. As we like wind down the season here, Shane gets injured and Ilya is very upset about it, and he visits him in the hospital, and you can tell like they are like their relationship is escalating. It's escalating in a very dangerous way. They're calling each other by their first names. This is no good. They're doing phone sex with each other, although it's Skype because this book is a little bit older and that's adorable, but they're doing phone sex with each other, which is possibly something that they would have done before. They didn't, but when they do it, Shane is like, I don't want to see like your thing. Can we like look at each other's faces? And it's like, oh, they're looking at each other's faces 75% of the way through the book. And that injury that happens to Shane, it kind of closes out this part of the book. Ilya is very upset about this. This is one of the very few times that we actually see Shane play. I believe Shane plays hockey 4 times in this book about hockey. Ilya visits him in the hospital, which the narrator claims is not an unusual thing for a team captain to do for a player on the opposing team who had been injured. And I'm like, all right, I don't know enough about hockey, so I guess I'll let that slide. But in this moment, Ilya thinks, and so help him, in that moment, Ilya wanted to tell him he would stay with him, that he would move into his apartment and help him with his recovery and make him sandwiches. Oh, I totally forgot. There's a nice scene where in part 3 or in part 2 where Ilya makes Shane a tuna melt. It's a big deal in the fandom. Tuna melts are a big deal. Make him sandwiches and watch the playoffs with him and read him his boring hockey book. But of course, he couldn't. Toward the end of this part, Shane has suggested something which Ilya is resistant to, and that is that they should spend some time alone together at Shane's cottage. Shane has a remote property in Canada. It's like hundreds of acres that he has his own cottage, although like don't think little tiny thing, like big hockey money thing. His parents also have a house out there, but it is like half a mile away. If they were to go there under the right circumstances, no one would know that they were there, and they could spend like actual quality time with each other. This is like being brought up in the last third of the book, and then part 4 will be time at the cottage. The cottage is coming, but like that is We don't get that until the very, very end of the book. It is, as I said, it is an interesting and unusual structure. So part 3 closes with the Stanley Cups and Scott coming out, and that part slams shut with Shane picking up his phone to call Ilya, and it's already ringing, and Ilya says, "I'm coming to the cottage." And just saying it and thinking about it makes me like feel a little bit of emotions. Like I'm not crying or anything, but I'm like, oh, that is very nice. Part 4 is the only continuous set of chapters in the book. So all 22 previous chapters and the prologue have all had time jumps, even if they are a few days or a week. Many of them are multiple months or even years time jumps. Part 4 begins in July 2017, going to the cottage, and it runs through until we get to the epilogue, which is another time jump. So these 5 chapters in part 4, I don't think makes sense to recap kind of like what happens in them, because there's not a lot that happens in them exactly, but they are probably people's favorite part of the book. Shane and Ilya retreat to the cottage where they can be themselves individually and together for the first time in their lives. Also, like, as much as I feel like part 3 and part 4 are more romance than erotica, part 4 has the most chapters with sex scenes in it of any part in the book. Every chapter except one has some kind of a sex scene in it. It's just now that the guys are in a position where they're talking with each other, it doesn't feel like erotica or erotic romance, but it is still just like the scenes come hot and heavy. And as much as I would like to see more rivalry between them, once you get to part 4, that's not really possible because all of part 4 takes place over the course of like a few days. So they are at the cottage and they are just being with each other, like making food for one another and hanging around and talking about their lives and talking about the future and having a lot of sex with each other, yes. And it is around this time that they start brainstorming solutions to their secret liaisons. So what are the problems that the two of them are facing? Well, one is that they are not individually out to anyone in particular yet. Ilya may or may not feel comfortable with doing that because he is a Russian citizen. So he needs to probably work on a pathway to Canadian or US citizenship. Shane also will at some point need to come out to at least his family and his close friends. This is now a little bit more possible because of what Scott Hunter did. But they have to them, the more important part of this, which is the rivalry part. They don't think anyone will understand the two of them being together because of their 10-year storied rivalry. So they think the only way that this will work is if they are able to essentially end the rivalry. And the way that they plan on doing that is by Ilya making a very big sacrifice, that he would leave Boston to a team that doesn't have the same rivalry with Montreal. He would move to Ottawa, so they could see each other more regularly, and that they would publicly announce that over the course of their rivalry, not unlike what now 20 years later we see with the actual guys with Sidney Crosby and Alexander Ovechkin, that the rivalry has become a bit of a frenemies kind of thing, that they have a begrudging mutual respect for one another, and that they are opening up a charity that they are co-founding that will be hockey camps for kids, and that the profits of that are going to go to a foundation which helps suicide prevention, which is something that is important to Ilya because he reveals late in the book that his mother had mental health struggles and that she unfortunately took her own life. And the whole idea is, as Shane puts at the end of the book, that they are going to play the long game. Ooh, getting a little emotional talking about it again. But that the two of them will have to keep things secret for the remainder of their careers. They think that they will have an excuse for hanging around with one another and that the rivalry will be gone. But for whatever reason, they while they're still playing hockey, there's no way they could actually come out. So they will continue to just like hook up in secret. And then once they retire, they will like come out. But that it doesn't particularly matter to them because they will have found a way to be with one another. And it is while they are discussing this and literally hooking up with one another that Shane's dad comes over to like whatever, borrow a cup of milk or sugar, it doesn't really matter. And now people know. So Shane and Ilya go over to Una and David's and say, hey, this is the thing, can't hide this thing from you. Una is my favorite side character in the book. We only get like precious little moments with her, but she's great. She is horrified that it is possible that Shane could have thrown games because of this. Obviously he didn't, and Shane brings up like, hey, you're competitive with dad, like, have you ever like thrown a Yahtzee game with dad? And she was like, I would never. And Yuna, I also love that. Well, and I love Shane's parents are immediately very supportive of him, as he suspected that they would, and very much integrating immediately Shane into their family, which is a very big deal for him. Yuna is very solutions oriented, just like, all right, what are we gonna do here? But I also love that she is like, she's horrified that Shane could have thrown things because of the relationship with Ilya, but she's also horrified that Ilya would leave Boston because it's like, you don't have loyalty to your team. But it means that he has more loyalty to his boyfriend, and yes, they are boyfriends at this point. They are now thinking of each other as boyfriends. So this happens in chapter 27 out of 27 chapters. The end of the main content of the book is Shane and Ilya sort of reaffirming their plan. And Shane says, I want to have a life with you. I know it will be awkward and will still involve a lot of sneaking around for a while, but I'm playing the long game here. So yeah, whatever it takes, I'm in. Shane also apologizes for the condo building nonsense at this point, which thank God, because that was like real weird thing to do, Shane. The epilogue is 16 months later, and they're playing on ice. Oh my gosh, we rarely see this in the book. Num 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 num. And it's really great. It's really great to see them like doing their thing. I just wanted so much more of this in the book. Ilya is like trips Shane, and they're like fighting about it over like with the ref. And I wanted more of this through the whole book, but at least we get it in the epilogue. And this is where they are. Ilya now plays for Ottawa, and they are about to make their their statement about like the closing the book on the public heated rivalry while they continue to have their private heated rivalry. Very amusingly, to get the money together to start this foundation. Well, Ilya, I haven't mentioned this before, but he has like a huge car collection that he sells, but Shane sells the secret condo to fund like the foundation. This is the end of the book, and as far as I know, there was not originally going to be a sequel, and Reid maybe felt a little forced by fans to kind of conclude their story and give them a more conclusive happily ever after. This feels a lot more like a happily for now to me. They're both very proud of each other at the end of the book. This is something that like escalates through the course of the book, that like their hatred for each other, it doesn't like, they're often annoyed with one another, but they mostly have respect for one another. And once they're in a relationship, at least when they're not playing against each other, they are mostly just proud of the other person. So they are both very proud of each other at the end for like what's going on. And it really seems unlikely that they will be able to maintain this for 10 years. So Shane has come out to his teammates in the intervening time, and Hayden, his friend, like knows intuitively that it's Ilya and it's right. So he's like the only one who's inside on this relationship. And when they do the press conference, he's worried that like everyone is going to know, because just like the way they're acting with one another. So it seems unsustainable that they will be able to keep this up for 10 more years. At the end of all of it, Ilya thinks, Andre, his brother, he has a better family now. The end. So my overall take on this book, I don't think is a fairly unique one. I mentioned multiple times that I think the structure is unusual. It is unusual to have so much of the book, more than 50% of the book, just be essentially erotic romance or just pure erotica with very little going on between the guys, and then move into the relationship development phase. One of the issues, there are two issues with that as far as I see it. The two issues are, one, I don't think there's enough like drawing them together in those like erotic scenes beyond their sexual relationship. And then two, I don't think that there is enough of the actual rivalry. I think it is just all heat, no rivalry. This gets into the fic adaptation of it all again. Rachel Reid sat down and wrote this book with two real people in mind and their actual rivalry that had been going on for a very long time when she was writing this book. And I think she coasted on the actual rivalry and didn't like create the rivalry on the page very much. She has a lot of the actual thing that a major component of Ovechkin and Crosby's rivalry, which is just how much of it is constructed around them, how much of it is a narrative. But she didn't include a lot of the like actual on ice stuff. And so when it crops up, it's just like, oh, it's like manna from heaven, especially like the epilogue of them like so long into their relationship with one another, their on ice relationship and their off ice relationship, and they're still just like that. And I wanted to see like this before I saw this, and we mostly hear about it. And this makes this book for me feel less like a hockey romance than a hockey setting romance. The setting is hockey, and but like if you look at the actual page count, like I said, I think Shane plays hockey 4 times in this book. There's just precious little hockey in it, and I think that that is ill advised, particularly in part one and part two. I think that it could still you could do exactly the same thing. Um, that Reid wanted to do, her goal there being like they are young, and they are. They start out, they're actually 17 at the beginning of the book when before they are like start fooling around with one another. 17, 18 years old. By the time they enter the league, they're only 19, right? By the end of the book, they're only in their like late 20s. So like the early side of this can very easily be just like purely sexual relationship. It's interesting that, you know, it's between these two rivals, but if we had seen more of the actual rivalry and like how they develop like a begrudging respect for one another, I think that that would have gone a long way, and also like would have turned down the spice level like just a bit. I mean, you could take one of those scenes or two of those scenes and replace it with hockey rivalry stuff, and it would still feel like a very spicy book. I feel this is also the part of the video where I reveal that I was in a forbidden romance. When I was in college, I hooked up with someone regularly who I should not have been hooking up with. They had been in a relationship with a friend of mine, and then I started hooking up with them. So it was like violating the bro code or whatever. And we were not friends. We did not see eye to eye on a lot of stuff. We had a very prickly personal relationship when they were dating my friend. But then we both moved into the same building, and it just became very convenient. And so a sexual relationship began. And by the end of it, neither of us caught feelings for the other, as far as I know, but we had become friends who still sparred with one another quite a bit. And how that developed certainly had something to do with what was going on in the bedroom, but it had more to do with what we did afterwards, which is like get high and watch Dollhouse. There was sexual compatibility there that opened the door to something else, but it was the something else that changed the dynamic of our relationship. And we don't get any of the something else until part 3 of this book, which is hundreds and hundreds of pages and literally like 6 or 7 years into the relationship of these guys. And I think that like on the very early side of their relationship, that's excusable. But after many years and many dozens and then hundreds of pages, it ends up feeling a little tedious. I already mentioned that it's also strange that throughout part 1 and part 2 we don't have a lot of other character interactions, so for me it felt claustrophobic, like we were locked in to these secret liaisons where there was nothing developing between the two of them, or it was like what was developing was very like was not it wasn't enough. And I think a thing that goes unexplored in the book is how is not just like it's hot that they are rivals, but that they might be the only people that can understand the other one. I think that is in a good way implied in parts 3 and part 4. But again, that is something that should be occurring to them, and we should be seeing it a bit more in parts 1 and part 2. That being said, part 3 and then particularly part 4, I was like tearing up a little bit recording this video, getting back into it. I think it is obviously done pretty well, but it's just like not set up very well. So it doesn't land for me as strong as it could. Like I should have been like weeping more when I was reading some of those passages and thinking about it. And I wasn't, because I didn't think that the characters I don't think that they got the journey that they deserved. And I do, and just to close out this thought, I think it is because it is adapted fic. I think that we are coasting on all of the like superstructure of the actual rivalry between Crosby and Ovechkin and not seeing enough of it on page and not seeing the consequences of it enough on page. And that if that had happened, I think that it would have it would have created a stronger foundation for what we see in parts 3 and part 4. All that being said, I obviously did have good positive thoughts about the book. I am certainly net positive on it. And there's also lots of instances of good, mostly fun and funny writing, and I want to go through that right now. So one of the first funny things that I wrote is from Shane's POV, as he is, I think this is the very first time he is getting things on with Ilya, or maybe the very first time they are kind of having like a little like mutual hand situation in the showers. I think like right after that in the hotel room, they're doing more, and Shane thinks to himself, "This was really gay." I believe in the like the first actual butt stuff scene, Shane again, lots from Shane. Interestingly, I think the characters don't have a lot of character development in this book. Shane does not seem materially different at the end of the book than he is at the beginning of the book, other than he's out. And he's accepted that he's a gay man. Ilya has things that happen to him. It's more that he like comes to terms with things about his life. I think he maybe does have a bit more character development. I mean, he stopped smoking, but a lot of the POV is from Shane. So it's kind of like a book that I think it's a book that cares more about Ilya, but tells Ilya's story from Shane's perspective more of the time. Again, it's third person. It's like in both of their heads, but there's a lot of Shane perspective in the book. So in that first butt stuff scene, Shane is like, trying to like, it's like, okay, I'm here. I'm present for this. Shane got on his hands and knees because that's how this worked, right? He was pretty sure. He'd watched about 40 seconds of gay porn once, and before he'd gotten embarrassed and closed his laptop. Now he wished he'd endured a little longer, if only for research purposes. I think that is very Shane. Shane is like, he is an embarrassed guy. That is one of the main theses that I have about this is the shame and pride dichotomy between these two characters. In this first instance, he is like, he's this awkward guy who doesn't want to be humiliated, but he's I'm sure he's blushing through this whole time. And he couldn't even watch like more than 40 seconds of gay porn. So he's just doing what he thinks he's supposed to do. There is at least one comic smash cut. I think there's two smash cuts in this. I always like those. Authors, yeah, this is subjective, but if you do this in your book, I'm probably going to like it. There's a smash cut between a section break. It starts with, the broadcasters always wanted to talk to Shane before the game, especially before games against Boston. He tried to think of a new and exciting way of answering the question, what does Montreal have to do to win tonight, as he made his way to the hallway outside the dressing room. Section break. Last question, Shane. What does Montreal have to do to win tonight? I do think the first non-sex scene, I didn't really cover it in the overview because it's not like it's like not terribly important for plot. It's not. This is, I don't want to call this like a PWP. This is not a plot book, but it's kind of. But I didn't really I almost forgot to mention the tuna melt scene, but it is very nice. I think that it is just like good writing, good character writing. It's nice seeing the guys together. It happens only a little bit after the halfway point, so I mean it is quite late, but it is nice to see that. I think that it was very particularly well written. Oh, another comic smash break. Probably nothing, Ilya said. Section break 1 month later. It wasn't nothing. While their relationship is escalating to the point where they just like they are in love with one another, but they can't express it to each other or themselves. Shane's hands cradled Ilya's face as he kissed him with the force of everything that they had almost said out loud. While in one of their 15 intimate scenes with one another, 15 scenes. God, Rachel, I know it's a heated rivalry, but come on. Shane dug his fingers into the hard muscle of Ilya's thighs as he took his deeper into his mouth. If he kept his mouth busy, he wouldn't be able to use it to ruin everything. Ilya, at one point after his father passes away, another thing that I failed to mention during the overview, but his father passes away, and it's kind of a relief to Ilya, honestly. Ilya says after that, my brain is not good right now, and it's like, I'm not, there's nothing from a book that I would want tattooed on me, and it's not that it comes in this book, but my brain is not good right now is something that I could imagine getting tattooed on me. After Shane's injury, Ilya is visiting him. He asks him, how is your head? Ilya asked. Shane had complained of a headache that afternoon. This is at the cottage, actually, but he's still recovering. He said that they had been common since his injury. Oh, better now, thanks. That was good news, because Ilya very much wanted to do sex stuff later. I think that's like a little bit like cringy millennial humor, but I'm a cringy millennial, so I liked that. Okay, this is another like kind of cringy moment. I think Reid sort of doesn't stick the landing with it exactly, and she goes too far in the cringy millennial direction, but I think that this is particularly good. This is when Shane and Ilya are at Shane's parents' house after they get found out. He says, and this is Ilya Rozanov. You probably know that. Hi, Ilya said. And he's been visiting. What were they exactly? It occurred to Shane that he and Ilya hadn't even figured out what label they were comfortable with. Lovers, Ilya offered. And I think that is funny enough. Shane thinks, way to choose the grossest possible word, Ilya. I think that that's not the right sentence after it. I think just like him thinking like, Ilya, what are you doing? Is maybe a funnier there, but just like he can't figure it out, and then Ilya just blurts out "lovers" to his parents. I think that is very amusing. Yuna, who is probably my favorite character in the book, while she is dismayed about the fact that these two rival hockey players are with each other, she says, "I just don't understand. How could this have even happened between you? Weren't there any nice men in Montreal, Shane?" And the fact of their rivalry and press and public perception and expectations, that is one of the major themes of this book. It was also quite present in Game Changer. It's just elevated to like 9,000% in this book. I mentioned that in the stray observation section of that video. This is like a huge part of Heated Rivalry. The press and the league are deeply invested in the rivalry between these two guys. They are rivals. They see each other as rivals from the get-go, but it was inevitable that they would be. It's like the world is conspiring for them to be, I think I've used this word several times, avatars of their two teams. And that, more even than the gay of it all, is what is separating the two of them. And it is beyond their control. And that is something that that makes it a forbidden romance, that creates that angstiness and that tension that you want. But there are a lot of things that are out of everyone's control, even just like the coming out process generally. We'll get into queer, like discussing them as queer men, but this is kind of another way of helping a reader feel that the tension and the angst of their own lives, things that they don't feel like they have control over. But boy, like, is this one of the very beating hearts of the book. From the very beginning with the World Juniors, Shane thinks Canada's hopes had been placed onto his 17-year-old shoulders, and he had let them all down. As a 17-year-old, he thinks that he has let Canada down because he lost to Russia and to Ilya Rozanov. I mentioned how that first All-Star game, the league like changed the rules or like changed how it works. Ilya, had expected to be on a team with Hollanders since they played in the same conference, but the league had decided to change it up this year and have North American players form one team and European players form another. No secret as to why the league couldn't get enough of the Rozanov-Hollander rivalry. Shane feels that they both feel this. They both feel public perception and expectations. Shane feels like he's been under intense focus since he was a kid, and that makes him want private moments. And this is something that again, like this is a thing that Scott Hunter thinks as well. And it goes uninterrogated in both books, but I think that it's hard to know, like, is that the only reason why they're private, or are they private because they're gay and they haven't like dealt with that yet? Scott Hunter is out to himself, at least, right? Shane has a gay awakening in this book, but many queer people have like a privacy, a desire for privacy because of things that they learn by being in the closet. Speaking more about expectations, Shane says you must be excited for the Olympics in Russia, and Ilya says yes, he's excited, but thinking about the expectations of his home country, of his father, made his stomach hurt and made him want a cigarette. And Ilya's father is like the worst when it comes to this expectation stuff. Nothing is good enough for him. And while Ilya is in Russia in Sochi for the Olympics, the only time his father talks to him before they have to go to like an event is just after they lose in like after Russia loses in the first game. His dad talks to him and says like how complains about how badly Ilya let Russia down. So these are the expectations that are put on both of these guys. The expectations of their teams and the rivalry of those teams and even their entire countries. They have all of the press and all of the fans and all of the league like bearing down on them, like creating and maintaining this rivalry. And they feel that. And it's very important that they feel that, and they feel that it's important, because otherwise it would make less sense, especially after Scott Hunter, like why they wouldn't feel like they could just like come out and be in a public relationship, or like casually or something. Like it's very, very important that there is this incredibly high wall built between the two of them, and the wall is the rivalry. It's the name of the book. Even by the end of part 3, when we are moving into the like lovey-dovey portion of it, when Shane gets hurt, he thinks 3 things. He thinks, oh boy, I need to tell my parents. I wish I could have told Ilya I wiggled my toes, which is a cute little moment because the paramedics are like, can you wiggle your toes? And he thinks about, I bet the press are showing this over and over and over again, right? 3 thoughts: parents, Ilya, press. Shane hires a personal stylist at one point, right? Like he has, and the entire relationship with Rose is an exercise in like public perception and expectations, his own like expectations that he has for himself and the public expectations. I think the Rose stuff is like not great at all. I don't think that that works, especially because she doesn't feel like a very fully developed character at all. It is not materially different from Shane watching gay porn at the beginning of the book. Like she is a version of that, like trying things out for him. I think that, you know, Shane is kind of like he's using her, and she decides that they can be friends, which is like big of her and nice of her, but she was used by him, and I think that that kind of sucks. Toward the end of the book, kind of, you know, closing out this section on public perception, while that, like, this is why they have to game out the long game. Well, this is why they have to figure out the charity and Ottawa and all of that. Shane says, I mean, lots of guys have friends all over the league, but we're like the only guys who have this whole story built around them where we can't stand each other and love nothing more than destroying each other every time our teams meet. That is the why for why they are going to have to be secret, why they're happily ever after or they're happily for now is in secret. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that. There are many queer stories, real queer stories over decades and centuries and thousands of years that were, you know, they were beautiful in their own way, but they had to be secret. So I don't necessarily think that it is a problem that their relationship has to be a secret. I do think that this is I feel the hand of the author a little bit in like the construction of all of this, where she kind of gets to eat her cake and have it too, of the pining and the angst, and it is pretty gay for you with Shane. I'm just like, it's hard for me to not see it as like pretty gay for you. But she created this other reason, this alternative reason why they would still be secret. So it's like, well, it's not the internalized or the external and structural homophobia, it's the rivalry. But we do get to the end of the book and they don't have the rivalry anymore, and they're still not like thinking about publicly coming out. And this is a world where they're like the only person who is more famous than either of them has also come out. So it does feel kind of like, oh, okay, I don't know. Like at that point, it's sort of like inertia, and it's like, well, we've got this plan. Well, let's just do the plan. It would be harder for them if they came out, for both of them. For Ilya, who at this point I don't like, has not totally figured out the Russia thing, that's very understandable. But for Shane, he's and Shane has come out to his teammates, but you know, we leave with that thought of like, we are professional rivals, and no matter what we do, we are always going to be seen that way. We were shaped by forces that are out of our control, and that is allegory for the actual queerness that's going on, to which we will now turn. I don't particularly like the depiction of queer men in this book. I'm just going to start with that. Books don't have to have like positive representation or like characters that you like, or they you know, you can have a good book that doesn't do everything that you want. This is also a product of its time. This was written like getting close to 10 years ago, so I don't hold a grudge. I don't have a rivalry against Rachel Reid for writing this book, but I don't think that these are particularly great depictions of queer men and queerness. And I think that Heated Rivalry kind of sits at a pivot point between like a mass of gay for you trope books and then more like bi awakening and demisexual characters and demisexual awakenings. And I recently read, I can't believe I'm comparing these two books, but I recently read Kiss the Villain by Rena Kent, which is terrible. The Heated Rivalry is if you had to choose between either of those two books, Heated Rivalry is a lot better. But, and Rena Kent, I think, is just wildly irresponsible with the decisions she makes with her queer characters in a way that Reid is not. But Kent did things just because Kent is writing like many years later that feel a little bit more true, feel a little bit more truthful to what queer guys would be like. So I think Kent is just doing gay for you in Kiss the Villain and in God of Fury, but she does at least go through the exercise of making her characters demisexual and having, you know, their gay or bi awakenings. And both of her books that are MM have somewhat like ace spectrum characters, and that's something that like goes unexplored with Shane. I think Shane is a little asexual, and I think if you were writing this book now, he would be having like a demisexual awakening. It's like he doesn't really like anyone but Ilya. He certainly seems to like getting in the butt. I mean, but you don't have to be a gay man to enjoy that. And I think a lot of my critiques of this book and queerness in it have to do with Shane. Shane's character, and that this will be the final section of this video about shame and pride and how those are kind of animating forces for Shane and Ilya. But like Shane is very like shame driven and feels humiliation quite acutely, and is like, you know, sort of a golden boy. He's like perfect and he holds himself to high standards. And I think that impacts him very negatively in his queer journey. So one thing that's basically absent from this book, other than that one throwaway line of he spent 40 seconds watching gay porn, is any kind of like research into gayness. And this is something that, like, bizarrely, someone like Rena Kent got right in Kiss the Villain. In Kiss the Villain, the younger character Gareth, who turns out to be gay, or like he's a spectrum demisexual, like a bunch of things, but he essentially has like a gay awakening. One of the very first things that he does is he goes on Reddit and he like starts a thread and presumably like Ask Gay Bros or something like that, describing his situation. He DMs people. This is something that this book, Heated Rivalry, was not even 10 years ago. Like Reddit existed. Like it is not. It is wild that Shane did not take an Am I Gay quiz. It is wild that he didn't do more research about everything, like trying to piece together his identity on his own. If he's a private person, that's like something that you would expect that he might do. Now, maybe part of it is like, I don't want to be gay. And he has a lot of shame related to being gay. There are so many little like throwaway lines in his head of like, I can't believe I'm doing this, especially like with a guy. And I think that it is wild that like at 18, Shane recognizes like sexual thoughts. He knows that he is having like something like that at 18, or on like I think at this point almost 19 years old, and he thinks like, I can't name what this feeling is. I'm like, you can't name it, bro? Are you sure? I think that's a little absurd that you can't even name it, that you like this attraction to guys. And after going through puberty, not having any attraction to guys whatsoever seems unusual to me. Like in something like Red, White, and Royal Blue, where Alex has a bi awakening. When he has that awakening at a similar age, he thinks back on previous relationships and feelings he had for guys and recontextualizes them and like, oh, maybe those were crushes. And it's like it's Shane even has like those thoughts later in the book of like, I was pretending, or I was pretending to pretend. Like this is the thing that he seems to know about himself. I think you can get away with it a little bit because he's like 18, 19 years old. A little. But like then we jump and he's like, now he's 20, now he's 21, now he's 23, now he's 25. And it's the same thing. It just seems weird that he hasn't like put this together more systematically for himself. And I think that there's just like plenty of ads where this is like, well, he's a professional hockey player. He's more worried about hockey than about this. It's like, okay, but he bought a secret condo because of it. So you'd think at the point where you're taking your secret condo check and giving it to the realtor, that you might be like, I think I've got, maybe I should take one of those Am I Gay quizzes. Particularly, yeah, don't like a lot of this setup. There is like part of Shane's early time with Ilya that I like and parts that I don't like, because it's a romance book, and particularly a sports romance book. Obviously, these guys are extremely attractive. They're extremely hot. And I mentioned this in the plot overview, but Shane really thinks a lot about how masculine Ilya is and manly, but he is doing it in a way that is contrasting with himself. That and this is like a very, very big part of their dynamic, that Shane is boyish and hairless and cute and adorable and submissive, and he is a breedable twink. And Ilya is hot and manly and masculine and hairy and aggressive and dominant, and he breeds twinks. But it is in their first time with one another, Shane has the thought that like watching Ilya climax is the hottest thing that he'd ever seen. And I think that there's a missed opportunity there for the psychological feeling that Shane is experiencing being the masculinity, like the co-masculinity of the experience, and not just the hotness of the person that he's witnessing. I remember my first time with a guy was like a not particularly attractive man in the back seat of a car, and I met him off of Grinder. And that is a really important memory for me. He was nothing to write home about or anything, but it was because it was the first time I did something with a guy. And it was the like being with a man, any man was hot. And it would have been hot for me. So I think that that is something that, especially because Shane turns out to be gay, like that is something that could have been tapped into more in that scene. I think we missed that. I missed that in that scene. We get like, basically only one line, by the way, on the like piecing things together, like thinking back on his life. Shane, in one of the many, many time jumps in parts 1 and 2, Shane thinks he had accepted the fact that he was more than okay with having sexual encounters with a man. Fine. He had suspected that about himself for a while now, and maybe Rozanov was just the first man to see that in him, to offer him the chance to experiment a little. And then this is when Shane thinks like, maybe I need to find another guy to fool around with. So that's not terrible. I think that is like a good, that is a reasonable thought for that queer man to have at that point. But that's like the only time he even thinks about it. Like, oh, he had suspected this about himself for a while now. 2, this occurs, I think, in like 2011 or something, or maybe this is even later. Maybe this is in part 2 in 2013. But anyway, it's several years after the beginning of their sexual relationship. So he might just be thinking like, well, I had suspected this about myself for a while since I keep getting by this guy. We don't know if he's thinking about before the World Juniors, right? It's like, well, yeah, Shane, if you are mostly like getting knocked on by this giant Russian guy, I think that maybe that is a good suspicion, bro. And I'm like going through like my notes on like the queerness of the book are like kind of in order as things happen in the book. So when we get to Shane's first time, I think that there's kind of like it's not, I don't know if it's a missed opportunity, but I think it's a little clunky. What Reid wants is that he has mind-blowing sex with Ilya, right? That's what you want for the characters, right? You want them to have mind-blowing sex with one another. The way she sets it up, though, I think it doesn't pass sort of like the common sense test. So Shane at this point has been experimenting at least solo, and he has a toy. And he mentions this to Ilya. And he still has the same toy like many years later, which is funny. But what Reid tells us, what the narrator tells us, is that Shane has used this toy on himself and didn't enjoy it. I think it is for a younger guy who is trying to figure out like what position he might be into. Having a negative bottoming experience with a toy is not necessarily going to make you think like, oh, well, like it didn't work with this toy, but surely it will work with this even larger thing that's attached to a person who I don't have control over. And who, by the way, on my first time is going to have me on hands and knees in like the worst position for a first time bottoming. I didn't think that was very good. I think it would have made more sense if Shane had used a dildo on himself and was like, I liked it. It was fine. It was like, it made me think that I want to go further with this. And then when Ilya did it, it was way better than the dildo. Well, I think like you can have like the spectrum can be from good to mind blowing, and it doesn't have to be from like actively bad. Like there's still a big, this is not a lot of space, Rachel. Like, I don't think this is getting us anything. And in fact, it just raises questions for me about like, well, wouldn't he be like more nervous about his first time? He is nervous, but like, wouldn't he be more nervous about like, oh, this might not be so good because it wasn't good when I did it with the thing. I think that's clunky. And then, like I said, whatever. I'm sure plenty of people's first times is doggy style, but like, that's not a great way to go the first time. And Ilya, apparently, like this sex god, has had sex with at least one man, and he mentions later in the book when Shane is talking about like anal sex stuff, he's like, well, haven't you ever had anal with a woman? And Shane is like, no, gross. I don't like having sex with anyone except for you. And I don't like, topping anyone in any way, which, it's like, yeah, he's like a big old bottom. He's a readable twink, as we've said. He likes to get his door knocked on. But like Ilya presumably has done butt stuff. And I don't think he is like a particular, like, Ilya is like a bit of a bad boy character, but he's supposed to be like with a heart of gold. I just think their first time bottoming needed a bit of a redo. I don't think it made sense that Shane had a negative experience beforehand, and I don't think it makes sense for someone who presumably had much more experience with anal sex to have been kind of like casual about it and like put Shane in a position where he might not have had a really good time. It makes to me, to someone who has like been in those situations myself many times, not to like brag or anything, but it makes Ilya feel more cavalier and more conceited and self-centered than I think the author intended. And then there are lots of other things that kind of build that up for him, where it's like, well, and he's late for the NHL awards, and Shane and the producers are freaking out. But in that circumstance, what Reid is doing is she's like, well, he's late because he's upset, right? And it's, she has all these excuses for him, but what it builds up to is like, it can make you feel like the character is just like is a jerk in a non-redeemable way. And I don't think that first time bottoming experience for Shane was meant to be that way. So I think that this is just sort of like an intersection of maybe like a lack of understanding about like the dynamics of those sexual situations potentially, or a lack of thoughtfulness about, even if you do have the experience, a lack of thoughtfulness and like actually getting it on the page. I think that you could have tons of experience with this yourself and then like not executed it particularly well. So like a combination of that and like real things about Ilya's character that are going on that like kind of intersect there in a negative way. Anyway, I mentioned this in a recent TikTok and Instagram video of mine. So if you want a shorter, and by shorter, I mean it's only 10 minutes long. If you want a shorter video to watch, which is a discussion about prostates and the male G-spot, I'll have a link down in the description to a TikTok of mine. But in that first time, Ilya is using his fingers on Shane, and he rubbed his fingertip again over what had to be Shane's prostate. Shane had kind of nudged it himself before when he had been alone, but Rozanov seemed to know exactly where it was and what to do with it. There's recent research as of just a couple of years ago that shows like direct stimulation of the prostate may not necessarily, in fact, for a lot of people, it is not the thing that causes them the best experience in bottoming. And what's going on here is, again, like this whole scene, it's just like it's supposed to be mind-blowing and like the best thing ever. And like this is like why there's a lot of like kind of addiction coding for Shane specifically in continuing to go back to Ilya. And this is supposed to be like the source of it, that it's like, oh wow, I can get something out of these sexual encounters that I can't get with a woman and I can't get with a toy. But instead of Rozanov having to communicate, and it's like she's getting tripped up here where it's like, well, I don't want them to be talking with each other, instead of him having to say like, does this feel good, or am I doing this the way you want, and Shane even being like, I don't know what I want, instead of having those kind of awkward moments with these two guys, young guys who even Ilya, who has had a lot of sex, like hasn't necessarily had a lot of that particular kind of sex, instead of doing that, it's just like works great, it's perfect. And I just don't think that works very well. I think that it would have been more interesting to me if, like, isn't it more interesting if these like pro hockey players who are so great at one thing are not necessarily perfect at it in the bedroom, and that is an area where their competition could come through, where Shane is like, no, you're not really doing it right, and then Ilya's like, what, like where he like, no, I want to like do it right, and like this comes up later in the book. They have like a jerk off race later in the book. Shane is like very obedient to Ilya. He wants to be good at it. He wants to like, he becomes like blowjob pro because of it. So like this is a moment where you could have had that as well, and it just is absent from the book. And I think that this doesn't feel like the dream first time that I would want as a gay man. All right, so that was like a lot of negative things about basically one scene. I just don't like the first time bottoming scene. There are good things in here. I do like the immediate support that Shane gets from his family. I do like that Hayden is supportive of him and that he's more upset that it's Ilya. I do think that it's not explored because it happens so late in the book, and this is like another, like, it's a consequence of the structure. I do think that it is, it's not explored in this book that when you're in the closet and you come out to someone, you are bringing them into the closet with you. You are making it their problem too. And that is like, that's kind of not cool. Or it depends on like who the person is, whether they're going to be cool with it. But even if they are cool with it, you are burdening them with the closet. And it was toward the end of the book where I realized that both of these first two books, there's basically no queer community. There's no like Hayden is the only one who knows about Shane and Ilya. Shane's family knows, but they're all straight. Hayden is straight guy with a family. So because they're in the closet and they haven't done anything to like find other people, they don't have like another gay friend. Same thing with Scott and Kip. Scott has been in the closet his whole life. All he ever did was like go to like fancy, luxurious European islands and have sex with like all of the hot European guys. And then Kip like has gay friends, but like they're kind of like set dressing for him in that book. Like they go to the Kingfisher, which is a gay pub, and the only he has Kyle, and like Kyle is a good foil for Scott in that book, but he's not like an important person to Kip. Kip's the important people in his lives besides Scott are his family and Elena. And it just kind of makes both of these two books for me feel kind of like hollow a little bit, because one of the most important things about being a queer person is finding community, finding those other queer people. And if you haven't found it, potentially being jealous of that, like seeing Pride, like NHL Pride stuff, and feeling like you can't participate in it. Like there's no discussion of that. There's I don't know about like around the time this was written if players were doing the Pride tape. I know that like recently got like nixed in the league, but like there's none of that in here. There's none of that like thinking about it. It really only comes up when Scott comes out, and they don't have a relationship with Scott. It's just sort of like I think the author has boxed herself into this, and so it feels. And then the first two parts of the book have almost no side characters, so it just feels like this. Like you could have these two could have been two guys who. Shane and Ilya could have been rival hockey players, like flying somewhere, and then like their plane went down on an island, and most of the book could have taken place on that island, isolated, and very little would have changed about it. That's not exactly true because of like the public perception of it, but like they could still feel burdened on the island of the public perception, right? If it took place like several years into their rivalry, like a lot of the dynamic would still be very much the same, and a lot of the everything about it would be the same because there's just like so little like other people in the book. So that's something I felt like pretty acutely is the lack of other queer characters and the lack of like trying to find your people. Just like in the first book, there is good use of lube and protection. They don't really have a protection conversation, which I think is unusual. Once we get to the end when they are basically exclusive with each other, that means they're also not talking about not using condoms. There's just like persistent condom use in both Game Changer and Heated Rivalry. I think that like that's probably like a symptom of the time where it's just like, oh, this is just like PrEP wasn't as big of a thing back then. PrEP, the pre-exposure prophylaxis. There is no PrEP in this book. The other kind of PrEP. And I think that is another thing where you got a character like Shane who is very shame focused, and I absolutely think that he would have done the research on what. So here, I think this book can get away with it because it's third person. I know Shane is the kind of guy who would be like, I've got to be totally clean. I get like if there is like one dot of something brown on Ilya's, even if it's on a condom, he'd freak out. Like, so I know that he is cleaning the hell out of himself. We don't see any of it, and we don't see him thinking about any of it. And I think it would have been like that's a little character moment that you could have of him just like, and it like that's where like all of the like the research part of it I think is missing from this book. But I can forgive it since it's not first person, or like just the way that it's told and constructed. It doesn't bother me that much because it's like I know that he is. But they use lube, they use protection. I think that's all like that's good. There is this sort of weird implication in some of the jerk off scenes about lube being used for jerking off. And I think this also was in the previous book and it just sort of like flew by me. But I think that like basically all the guys in these books use lube to jerk off, which I don't think is it's not bizarre or anything, but I don't think it's like that common because it's like, it makes a huge mess. It makes a much bigger mess out of that than it would normally be, first of all. And it's like you're going to have to clean up more extensively if you're using lube in that situation. Just seems unusual to me. So this ended up being a very long discussion on this. I think like it really like Ilya seems pretty believably like a bisexual gourmand. He already knows what he likes. He likes to have sex with people. He likes to tell people what to do and them doing it, and then smoking afterwards. Shane has more of a journey to go on with his sexuality, and I don't love it. Don't love the secret condo, certainly, and I didn't like his first time bottoming scene. And To close this out, like I don't want to belabor this, but there is a lot of like Shane has a lot of internalized homophobia, and this gets into the final section that where I want to discuss shame and pride in these two characters. But I think it's like this is maybe again an unintentional consequence, and I think this is one of the things that as I'm recording this video, I'm realizing that there's just a lot of unintended consequences in this book that you can probably fly by if you're not thinking about it too carefully. But because Shane is so shame oriented, Reid has lots of thoughts that he has, which are like shameful about his homosexuality. So he ends up having a lot of what feels like internalized homophobia. Like, oh God, I can't believe I'm doing this. And with a man, instead of, I want this and I can't because of the league, because of the rivalry. That's where it gets to later, but especially in the early side, it just feels kind of. And then the final, like, making me feel as a queer guy thing, used the F slur in this book. It's more casually used in this one than in the previous one. Someone calls Ilya that on the ice, and he thinks like, yeah, maybe a little, like 50%, 30%. Um, that is maybe something that I would think if someone said that to me to deal with it in that way. But I just don't like it. I just don't like it being used in books like this. And this gets us to our final section, which is about shame and pride. The word pride or proud is used 25 times in this book, and the words shame and humiliation together, or humiliate, are used 26 times in this book. And my thesis is that Reid constructed two yin yang characters. Shane is a character who is primarily driven by shame, but has a deep well of pride inside. And Ilya is his mirror opposite in all ways, including this. He is a character who is deeply driven by pride, but has a secret well of shame inside of him. This exists along all spectrums and axes of their character. It's in the bedroom, it's on the ice, it's in their familial relationships, it's everywhere. Talking about the bedroom, Ilya likes to humiliate Shane. I mean, he likes to humiliate Shane on the ice too, but he likes to humiliate him in the bedroom a little bit. Not like it's not like super kinky, but he wants him, he says things like, get on your knees, and you love this, don't you, Hollander? Like, he likes putting Shane in his place, and Shane, which is a prideful thing, and Shane likes to be humiliated a little bit. Shane is blushing all the time. I told you to remember the blushing and the smirking. This is where it comes out. Shane is constantly blushing. He's constantly like, he is like this, he has this good boy image of himself that he doesn't necessarily, that he feels burdened by. He is burdened by that. He is burdened by the closet. He is burdened by all these expectations. And he needs someone like Ilya who can like make him do things that he wouldn't necessarily do. But I think that there are these primary emotions and secondary emotions. So for Shane, his primary emotion is shame. It's blushing. But he has this inside thing of pride. So like one thing that I highlighted early on was Shane thinks he was a rookie and he was an NHL All-Star. He could be a little proud of himself. Ilya has no problem feeling proud of himself. Ilya is smirking all the time about how great he is at everything. Later in the book, there's this section that I highlighted. Ilya smiled to himself. He actually loved this. He loved being on the road and disappointing home crowds across North America. He loved the insults, the booing, and most of all, the sound of a crowd so gutted by his team's performance that they couldn't even bother to boo. A winded, humiliated crowd. That was Ilya's favorite sound. But then Ilya has secret shame inside. In the Sochi chapter, Ilya thinks he didn't want to hear his father, who likely hadn't even watched any of the games, shame him for not bringing home a gold medal. That is something that is just for Ilya. And then obviously the deep secret shame is the death of his mother by suicide. So these are like integral parts of their characters, and it is one of the things that I think Reid does the most skillfully and builds the most skillfully around, like with both of these guys. I wish it had been a little bit more skillful with the queer stuff, but like having them be these two kinds of people and then intersecting them and building their relationship there, I think works very, very, very well. Going back into the bedroom, there's a moment when Ilya says, "Did you like sucking my dick?" And Shane says, "Oh, those English words, you know?" Rozanov licked under Shane's ear and Shane gasped. "Did you like it?" Rozanov asked again. Shane swallowed his saliva and his pride. Yes. And that shame-pride dynamic between the two of them and their rivalry is in the bedroom too. Shane felt stupid that he hadn't even tried to properly finish the job on Rozanov. This guy was determined to one-up him at every turn. Oh, again, secret shame that Ilya doesn't normally express. And then Ilya felt the rare and unwelcome sensation of his cheeks heating in embarrassment. It's rare that his cheeks heat in embarrassment compared to Shane. He didn't usually yell like that when he was coming. And I think one of the best things about what little character development that we get between the two guys is how they start to feel proud of each other. And it is the mutual pride that they feel for each other. The pride that Ilya wears on his sleeve, and that's like a little bit deeper for Shane when Shane beat Ilya at the All-Star Skills competition, he has to let himself say like it felt good. But like when they both start feeling proud of each other, that's like that's good stuff. You want to kiss me on television? Yes, after I win the Stanley Cup. Shane spread his arms out. Oh, so in this romantic scenario, you've just defeated me? Yes, sorry, Ilya says. I'm not going to be in the mood to kiss you if I've just lost the Stanley Cup, Rozanov. And then Ilya says, but you would be so proud of me. And he would have been. He would be proud of him. It is Ilya who... So Ilya is perhaps too prideful and has secret shame and needs to resolve the tension between those two things. Maybe like being too prideful, being too into the rivalry is something that has to get pulled back a little bit for him. And then Shane has the like secret pride that he needs to let out more. He needs to allow himself to feel good about things, to feel proud about himself. And that like primary shame motivation, which is like related to his homosexuality and to other things about his character, that needs to be reined in. And that's the two guys are able to like resolve those things in the other so that by the end of the book, they just have that mutual pride for one another. And so the book ends with Shane saying, I'm so proud of you, Ilya. I want you to know that even if we keep it a secret, I'm proud to be with you. And Ilya says, I know, me too. When the time is right, we will stop being a secret. So how did it go? Overall, like I said, I'm net positive on this experience. Hey, hockey has nets, right? I still don't really know a lot about hockey. I think that this book definitely suffers from the fic adaptation curse that the first one did. It's RPF this time, but instead of incorporating significant portions of the rivalry between the two men that these characters were based on, Reid is using that as a crutch and then building off of that. And then when you remove the actual rivalry, it just feels like it's missing something. It is the interesting second half of a public rivalry, the illicit liaisons between these two guys without the first part, without the rivalry part of it. And I'm not saying that there's no rivalry in this book. There is a lot of it, but it is a lot of telling and less showing. And basically what I'm saying is I really would have liked to have seen more hockey in this hockey romance. When the epilogue almost made me mad that we were seeing this great moment of Shane and Ilya just like actually fighting it out on the ice, and we hadn't seen a lot of that in the rest of the book. So I think Heated Rivalry does end up being a bit of a compromised experience because of its adaptation from fic. I think it is a very compromised experience because of the way that Reid wanted to tell the story by having this like long, build up. I wouldn't even call it slow burn, but like it gets tedious at some point. Relationship between these guys that is purely sexual. So until we get to the point where they are actually like doing relationship things, I think it is very deeply compromised, particularly in the character of Shane, as looking at queer male characters interacting with one another. I think that there is a loneliness that I feel reading about these guys that is both intentional and unintentional. And the loneliness of being Shane and Ilya and having to like figure out how to be with each other is explored very thoroughly, but the loneliness of being queer people without community is deeply unexplored in this book, and I think that is that's regrettable. These guys were constantly knocking on each other's doors, and I was really hoping that they would knock on someone else's door. Not that this would be an MMM or something like that, but that we would invite of some other characters into the story with them, and that they would have any kind of engagement with their queerness besides their own mutual attraction to and relationship with one another. Perhaps we will get that in the long game. I certainly will get to that eventually, but I think if you isolate this as a single reading experience, the one word I have for it is compromised. And I think it is largely a problem of degrees, how it was tuned exactly, that it is a little too heated and not enough rivalry. And I said I didn't cry, but I do feel a bit of a kinship with Shane, despite all of the negative things that I had to say about his character. So perhaps I didn't cry, or maybe I just pretended I didn't cry.